Hey, let's talk about speciation. It's me, Moser. And after this video, you should be able to compare conditions that are found in nature to the conditions that are needed for speciation to occur. You should also be able to compare descriptions of populations to the definitions of species to judge whether speciation has occurred. It'd be great if you already knew what speciation was and how we define species. Let's get started. So you know that speciation is when one ancestor species evolves in such a way that at some point we can point to two different populations and say those are not the same species anymore. And boom, we have a new species, or two. Let's examine the case of the Mexican tetrafish, also known as Astyanax mexicanus, which exists in two forms. Those are also called morphs, and see if it meets the definition of speciation. There are Mexican tetrafish that live in streams, beautiful streams I might add, in the mountains of central and northern Mexico and southern Texas and even up into central New Mexico. They're small. They're under 5 inches long, and honestly, they're not all that interesting looking. You probably wouldn't pay them any attention if you went wading. These are the surface-dwelling tetras. They're one of the morphs. Then there's the other morph, the cave-dwelling blind tetra. It's a blind cave fish. You notice anything? Like the lack of eyes and the lack of pigment? Weird. The cave dwellers are small, isolated populations that occur within the range of the species. Why do they look so different? Well, they live in caves. Natural selection's why they look different, of course. And these fish, they have been studied extensively. I mean, seriously, who can resist an eyeless albino cave fish? So cool. So how did there come to be a blind albino cave fish? Well, surface-dwelling tetras ended up deep inside limestone caves. It's dark in there. Calories are limited in a cave. And over many generations, the fish that didn't spend any energy growing eyes and making pigment, yes, remember that every body part requires energy. They did just a little better. Survived more often, had more babies that survived, and voila, blind albino cave fish. So, has speciation occurred? Well, let's review the conditions needed for speciation to happen. The species have to be isolated so that there's no gene flow between them. Yeah, the cave fish probably can't get back to the surface, and the surface fish probably can't get deep into the caves. That would be geographic isolation. The isolated species experience some sort of selective pressure. Yeah, a cave with limited calories and no light sure meet that criteria. We assume that there was variation in the original population, as well as a small number of fish that got caught in the cave system. Dark and low calories are certainly challenges to survival, and most fish have far more babies than will ever survive. These guys are ripe for natural selection. So it's obviously possible that these two morphs of the tetra could be undergoing speciation or have already. Well, which leads us to the next question. Are they different species? To be the same species, if we look at our most modern definitions, organisms must look alike. They have to have shared physical characteristics or morphology. They have to be able to produce fertile offspring, and they have to share some pretty high percentage of DNA, usually including a few specific genes. We'll examine these one at a time, and let's start with morphology or physical characteristics. The cavefish have no eyes and no pigment. I think we have a yes here. Or I should say, a no. Obviously, they can't be the same species. They're very different in physical appearance. As a matter of fact, when the blind cave-dwelling tetra was first found, it was just assumed to be a new species, different than the surface-dwelling tetra, based only on appearances. Okay, next up. Can produce fertile offspring. Well, as different as the cave fish look, researchers have found that every now and then a surface dweller does end up in a cave or vice versa. And the blind cave fish, with their surface-dwelling cousins, have no problem producing fertile offspring. Well, we can stop right there. These two very different looking fish are the same species. Yes, they can produce fertile offspring, but of course we'll go on. Lastly, must share a pretty high percentage, a given percentage of DNA, usually including specific genes. Well, it's pretty complicated, and there are all sorts of little subpopulations in different caves, along with surface populations that are somewhat isolated from one another. But the bottom line is that all tetras still share most of their DNA, including many significant genes. It's a yes. Now, some alleles are more common in some populations, but based on the shared DNA definition, these fish are still the same species. Well, to sum it all up, let's ask 3 questions. 1, has natural selection occurred? Yes. The cave-dwelling tetra has been changed in a very real and noticeable way by selective pressure. Did speciation occur? No. By the most modern definition, heck, even by the middle of the oldest of the definitions, the blind cavefish and the surface-dwelling tetras are still the same species, however different they may look. They are different versions, different forms or morphs, but the same species. Could speciation occur at some point? Oh, yeah. Gene flow between the two populations could get cut off completely at some point, and natural selection could cause further changes to one or more of the morphs, one or both of the morphs. It's entirely possible that at some point, these two could become different species. Okay, let's sum it up. Can you look at the conditions that are found in nature and compare them to the conditions that are required for speciation? Can you compare descriptions of populations to the definition of a species to judge whether or not speciation has occurred? I think you can. Okay, get going.